I was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1930, May 29th, and I was born at Martha Washington Hospital in Chicago. Uh, my mother uh, actually was part English and part Swedish, and the other part of my family was all Swedish. So I got three parts Swedish, one part English background. And then we had a aunt some years ago that did a study on our family tree and found out that we also had some French blood in us and Algonquin Indian. I thought that was interesting with the Algonquin Indian. I looked them up and found out that they were originally from Canada, and during an Indian war up there, which they lost with some other tribe, they got pushed down from Canada into Pennsylvania, New York area. So that might help explain how they got down in that area, because my other relatives were from Pennsylvania area. Anyway, that kind of fills you in a little bit on the background of the family thing a little bit. I understand that my relatives in Sweden primarily live in the Stockholm area. And it was interesting, years later I found out that they had been in the newspaper business, a number of them, which might help explain my tendency to want to go into media things, writing, newspaper work, if you can believe that. See, of course, my mother had divorced my dad, so for a while, I was living with my grandparents in Chicago in an apartment building off of Milwaukee and Lawrence Avenues.
What do you remember about your grandparents?
I do specifically remember my grandparents. My grandmother was a very good cook, and she's the one that got me started on drinking coffee and eating hard bread, as all Swedes do. And then, like I said, she was kindly toward me, took care of me. My grandfather was a streetcar conductor, and he was more of a disciplinarian type person. So, and he used to like to get his razor strap out and spank my rear if I got out of line, which was often enough. And of course, I also spent some time with my aunt Ethel. Was a very integral part of the family, even though she didn't live with us. So I got, like I say, spent some time with her. And then my Uncle Chuck, who lived with us. So it was my Uncle Chuck and my grandmother, my grandfather, and myself lived in the apartment building. And he was single for a long period of time before he finally got married. Can we shut? Okay, when I was younger, my grandparents had a summer home up in Lake Como, Wisconsin, which is adjacent to Lake Geneva. And we would go up there a lot for fishing. So my big memories were of being brought up, being taken out. We'd leave early in the morning and go up to the lakes and get things ready, and then do a lot of fishing, which I really got into my blood. And later on, it got into my brother Ron's blood. So we enjoyed the fishing a lot. And I was kind of a scrangly looking kid, though, very thin, like all Adam's apple in years. But of course, later on, you can tell by looking at me now that changed. I went to Palmer. I remember Palmer Grade School. I remember that, and loved playing ball there with the guys. And I remember one day I was playing ball there, and I got the word to go home. Something bad had happened, and turned out my grandfather was killed. Well, actually, he took his own life. So that was kind of a sad memory that I have. Later on, then, after that, I went to grade school. I went to Carl Schurz High School. And that was kind of interesting because it was mainly Polish people there at the time. So when they'd talk about like who's in the class, call out the names. Kozlowski was Lowski and all of those kind of names. All of a sudden they come to my name, which by the way had changed when I went to grade school because I was living with my grandparents. They put me under the name Norcott for grade school, but when I went to high school, I reverted back to my Wiberg name to attend Carl Schurz. But anyway, the name Wiberg was mentioned. Everybody turned around and wondered what a Wiberg was doing in with all the Polish names. But anyway, I enjoyed high school at Schurz and participated in track events. Tried out for basketball, but I was a little too lightweight. Didn't have enough beef on me to do that. And unfortunately, I never was what you'd call an egghead as far as a student. I just kind of enjoyed doing things, but not really studying, which kind of carried over later when after I enlisted in the Navy and served overseas, mainly in the Pacific Theater. And my primary service was on an aircraft carrier called Philippine Sea. And I was an aviation ordnanceman, which is deals with undersea weapons like aerial torpedoes and mines and that type of thing. But it was when I was aboard ship that I accepted the Lord, so that was a key event in my life. Although I didn't really follow the Lord that fully, because there was nobody really to guide me along.
Who shared the Lord with you?
It was a chaplain aboard ship that brought me to the Lord. I think my heart was ready, so that was good. And then, like I said, we served over in Pacific Theater, and so I got to visit places like Hong Kong and Taiwan and the Philippines, which I enjoyed. I like the people over there a lot. And I like the people in Japan, too. They were very, we're talking about the common people. They're very nice. Pleasure to be over there.
Can we go back to when you were younger and what your memories are of your mom and your dad and your brother?
Yes. Well, I remember when I left my grandparents after my
How old were you?
granddad's death, when I would have to be, I'd say, around 14. That I went to live with my mother in her apartment building where she lived with my brother. And of course, my mother was single at that time. And it was a hard period. We didn't have much food in the refrigerator. I remember that. And she worked. So Ron and I were both what today they would call latchkey kids. That would come home from school and no parent would be there, which of course was tempting to get into trouble without a parent around. Easy to do.
Like your little street gang?
Yeah, so I actually became a member of a gang. Well, more of a leader of the gang, I guess you'd say. We called ourselves the R Brothers, which is seems kind of stupid now. That was kind of an affiliation of guys who'd like to bond together.
What kind of trouble would you get into?
Well, we never really got into serious stuff. I mean, we're talking about the days that preceded drugs and that, so we weren't any problems with drugs, and maybe if there was any problem at all, we might be sneaking a drink somewhere, where we could. Like if some parents weren't around, some
How did you
beer
and
or
your
alcohol were around,
Yeah.
we'd taste it.
How did you and your brother get along?
My brother and I, for the most part, got along well, except we also did the typical brother thing where we had to compete with each other to see which one was the more talented brother. And so there was a number of fist fights.
Gotta tell about your stab in the box
Oh,
game.
well, we got really bizarre. We got a hold of an old mattress box, and we dreamt of a game called Stab the Box, where we get it was a very small kitchen knife out of the table, and one of us would get in the box, and the other would get to stab the box while the other's moving around and trying to avoid getting stabbed. And fortunately, neither of us really got hurt. I think the Lord was really watching over us with that idiotic game. So anyway, that was part of that.
How
Although
about
we would stand up for each other if one got in trouble with somebody else.
right? What is the movie Christmas Story bring
Oh
back
yeah,
memory-wise?
The reason that I enjoy this movie Christmas Story with Ralphie and his Red Ryder BB gun was that was my era, and I always wanted a Red Ryder BB gun. I finally got one. In fact, my brother had a BB gun too, and we went out. Unfortunately, we were shooting birds, and the people in the neighborhood reported us. And they came to my grandmother's house, apartment, and she squealed on me and says, yes, he's got the BB gun. And she showed him where it was, and they took away my BB gun. So that was the end of my bird shooting.
Okay, we'll go back to high school and
All right.
talk about the type of guy you were. And did you
Well,
date girls or?
Well, in high school, because of the nature of the high school and being a tough school with a bunch of tough guys, I had to be tough to survive. Otherwise, you'd be constantly picked on. So I was considered a tough guy who would stand up for myself. I wouldn't put up with any junk from other kids my age. As far as girls, though, were concerned, I wasn't really that interested. I was more interested in sports. That dominated my thinking, really, until I maybe got a little older and maybe started thinking a little bit about girls.
Did you have a car?
Never had a car. In fact, my first car that I ever had was after I got married to Mary Ann, and she had a little car. That was the first car, and I had to learn how to drive it. And not coming from a background of being around cars or driving cars, it was a little harder for me to learn how to drive. Because we used to take, if we needed to go anywhere, you either walked or you took the bus or subway. So that was our mode of transportation. Or maybe somebody gave you a ride somewhere.
What part of Chicago did you live in?
Well, actually, we lived in many different parts of Chicago. I know at the time that Mary Ann knew me, we had moved around 8 times. It seemed like every time my mother got tired of looking at the wallpaper in a particular apartment we lived in, that we'd move somewhere else.
What about when your mom got married again?
Well, when she married Joe Firth, things changed a little bit because, all of a sudden we had a male figure back with us. Of course, I had a little bit of that when I lived with my grandparents and my uncle, who were the ones that disciplined me there. But with Joe, he was, like I said, I think he was pretty much a nice guy and fair, but his background was that he and his brother had been raised in an orphan home, so he didn't think in terms of a child should be pampered, because I remember him telling me when he was 18 that they told him at the home, here's some money and you're on your own now, goodbye, so and maybe that helped me a little bit because I noticed it was after that I joined the Navy. Actually, I was in the let's see, Navy Reserves going to Great Lakes, not Great Lakes, over the downtown where you guys,
Navy Pier.
at Navy Pier, yeah. And
All right,
yeah,
your Navy days.
all right.
What year was it when you were doing the Navy?
Well, okay, I actually joined. You would ask me that because my memory's starting to slide a little bit on that. But it was 19. Let's see, I have to figure it out. That'd be about 1948, 47, 48. That period of time. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. Around 50. Yeah, I'm sorry. It was 1950 to 1954. I was in the Navy.
What was going on in the world at that time?
And that was during the Korean conflict over there. And a number of guys that I knew in Chicago did want. Of course, it was easy for me to transfer from the Navy Reserves into the regular Navy, but they said they were just going to wait until they got drafted. And a lot of those guys that I knew got drafted in the Army. And they never did come back from the war. They ended up in the front lines. I guess the thought was if you were from Chicago area, you must be a tough guy, and we'll put you in the front lines. So a lot of those guys never did come back. But with the Navy, I went to Great Lakes Naval Air Station, and I'll tell you, one of the hardest things in life is the transition from civilian life in the military. Because first thing they do is they shave all your hair off, and they try and make you a non-personality, just a number, to where you will do what they tell you to do. So that was a very, very difficult period of time, although it was a short period. I still remember that as being hard. And I know we had one guy in our group that ended up committing suicide in the laundry room that we found. He hung himself. So that was kind of traumatic having that happen. But once I got out of boot camp and actually got my first assignment, and it seemed like during my military career I was either in Florida or California, from the coast to coast. So it was kind of nice that I had both of those areas that we operated on. And like I said, I went, one of the other places they sent me was down to Southern California to run a skeet and pistol range at a place called San Ysidro, which is 2 miles from Tijuana, Mexico. So we used to have a lot of wetbacks come across our base, and we'd catch them, and they were scared to death, but we just released them back into Mexico, to the officials, so they got back into Mexico. But running a skeet and pistol range was almost like a civilian job. It was so easy, and the base I was on, we were well fed, so it was a real pleasure to work there. But then things changed again, and then I went back to school in Florida for training for the undersea weapons thing, and then after that I got shipped back to California to get on a ship in the Philippine Sea. So it kind of brings us up to date on that.
What was the name of your ship?
The Philippine Sea. It was called CVA 47, a very large sized carrier.
What was life like
and,
on the
we
ship?
had a complement of about 3,500 men. And, well, of course, life aboard, like any military thing, is rather organized. And you're on certain times, and they wake up early, and there was a lot of chipping and painting, I remember, aboard ship, and doing cleanup jobs. But then we also had it turned out I ended up running the undersea weapon shop, because the guy that was supposed to be there to run the shop had to leave the ship just prior to our leaving for the on the Pacific Ocean to go across the ocean. So that was kind of interesting for a junior person like me to be in charge of a group of guys.
Did you have any direct conflict?
Not really. I stayed out of trouble and kept a straight nose, and I followed the military code real close. Like, for example, if I was told to be on watch and they act like I was a guard, I was a guard. I wasn't the type of person you'd mess around with. You know, they would, like at the one base in California, they point out at me and like, there's Dick Wiberg out. You don't have to go out there and bother him because, you know, better avoid him.
So how many years were you in the Navy then?
I was in a total just short of 4 years. A few days short of 4 years. But like I said, it was a good experience. And I got to see the world a little bit. Not the Europe part, but the Asian part.
Okay.
Okay, as far as the type of work that I've done over the years, I remember when I was still in high school that my first job was as a soda jerk, which some people don't even know what a soda jerk is, but it's a person who makes milkshakes and sodas and ice cream type things like sundaes at a drugstore. The place was called Otto Seidenstricker's drugstore. It was right at Elston and Lawrence Avenue. That was a very interesting first job for me because I had to sell things that I normally had no experience in selling, like cigars and other things that are more of a personal nature in the pharmaceutical type area. So, and the cigarette thing was, we had them stored down in the basement. I remember, especially.
For a second here. Okay, go.
Anyway, during the wartime period, we had these different kinds of cigarettes down there. Like one, I remember the name of it was Wings, and that. But they were stored down in the basement of the drugstore, and I used to hate to go down there because they had large-sized rodents down in the basement. And I remember one time I went down, Otto sent me down to get some cartons of cigarettes to bring up, and I went down, and this rodent was behind a Hinckley and Schmidt water bottle, and when I looked at him, of course, his head was magnified in the bottle, and I just ran out of there real fast. Came back out and told Otto about it. He thought, you know, like, yeah, nothing to it, and he went down and, you know, they got rid of it, scared it away, or did something. But, so that was interesting. And I do remember I worked with another high school guy. His name was Sam Castelny, and he was more of a real jock at the high school, at Carl Schurz High School. And he, if he didn't like a particular person that came in, like for a soda or a milkshake or something, he would play some havoc with them. I remember one time he didn't like this one kid who ordered a chocolate milkshake, so he put some X-Lax in his milkshake. And we didn't see the kid for a while. Anyway, that was our
Were you
first
ever a
job.
paper boy?
Yeah, and oh yeah, I'm glad you remind me of that. I did deliver papers. One thing I didn't mind the paper delivery part, but the part that was the hardest was those were the days when they would have the paper boy also do the collecting of the money, and people weren't exactly thrilled at times to pay money for their paper, so you'd have to go through a lot.
Okay.
And just keeping the record straight as to who paid and who didn't pay was difficult, but it probably was good because it gave me a little bit more of a work ethic, you know, learning how to do something different. So that was that. then I remember one other job I had. I worked at a plastics factory called Sandy Plastics, where I handled an extrusion line of plastic coming out, and they made stuff for refrigerators and other things like that. But, that was a hard job because of the heat from the melted plastic and such exact things that you'd have to have on measurements and making sure the plastic didn't cool too fast and bend or something like that. So that was a strain on me. Okay. All right. After my work at the plastics factory, which really didn't last that long, I got a job at Lansing B. Warner Insurance Company on Peterson Avenue in Chicago. And my job was as a trainee to become an underwriter. We wrote inland marine type insurance, like on jewelry, horses, and things of that nature. And it was while there that I spotted a young girl working in the steno department who turned out to be Mary Ann. So I would send her my transcript things in for her to type up, along with other guys. And after a while, I started running into her at the bus stop because we both took the bus to work. And that's how we met, really, on the bus, to start talking. And the next thing I knew, I was dating her. We would also go on dates by bus. So, like, for example, we would go downtown to see a movie, and we would stop at a little ice cream place called Lucy's downtown. And that was really a wonderful experience. Then after we had spent some time together, of course, Mary Ann being so young and wanting her future at college, looking forward to that since most of her family had gone to college, we had a period where we didn't see each other. And during that time, I went to work for Aetna Insurance Company, where I was doing the same kind of work. And I happened to run into this fellow Norm Lagerquist, who worked at Lansing B. Warner, and said, "Hey, your old girlfriend is back in town." So I called her. So we started dating again. And of course, as we all know now, that we ended up getting married. And I was still I had started attending Bradley University. So Mary Ann was able to join me at Bradley University. We had our own little apartment, our first apartment, which is a one-room affair with a little alcove for a so-called kitchen. And I remember that I majored in journalism, which was, as we now know, was one of my primary interests. In fact, during my youth, when I was living with my mother and my brother Ron, he always used to accuse me of reading the dictionary. But I loved words and I loved writing, so it seemed like a natural area to. And I also love photography, which I'm still carrying on to this day. So, but once again, something did come back to haunt me a little bit, and that's my lack of dedication to studying, and that which was proved to be hard for Mary Ann to handle, because I wouldn't cram. I would do everything the last minute in getting ready for a test or to turn some work in. And that drove her nuts, because she liked doing things well in advance. That probably explains why she, in her schooling, got A's and I got C's. But anyway, I did finish school and I did graduate. And so that was good. And it's funny because at that time, when I graduated from college, it was good opportunities for work. In fact, I got hired before I even left college to work as the editor of a weekly newspaper in East Peoria, Illinois, which is Tazewell County. It was the Tazewell County Courier. So I was one of their youngest editors they ever had, straight out of college. Except I was a little older since, I had my military time then. And that was very interesting work, being an editor of a paper. It was a lot of prestige with the job. And you got to know a lot of people, but it didn't necessarily mean that you were popular with everybody. I know on one story where I uncovered something and printed in the paper, I had some threats that people were going to do me physical harm or damage my car. So, of course, nothing ever did happen, but that was my first exposure to that side of that type of work. But I still liked it. And while I was working at the Tazewell Courier and Mary and I were living in Peoria, an opportunity came up for me to come into Schwinn Bicycle Company. My dad worked there as an assistant controller because they needed somebody to be their advertising manager and run. They had a newspaper that they put out for dealers. So I came in and interviewed, and lo and behold, I got the job. So Marianne and I were able to, I remember we got our first apartment there off of, let's see, one of the suburbs, Bellwood area, or Harwood Heights. That was at Harwood Heights we had. And that was kind of an interesting experience because that's where our first daughter, Kim, lived with us after she was born, and we lived on the second floor of the apartment. I remember it had a big balcony, and we had a huge pool in the center of the place. And of course, so that Kim and of course us, we spent quite a bit of time around the pool. It probably helped her in there getting to learn how to swim fast and do things around water. Then while we're at Schwinn, like I said, I was there a number of years, and that job developed nicely, except that they never paid a decent salary. There was more, again, of you got a prestige job, and vendors were always trying to do nice things for you, like take you out to golf or take you out for meals and that type of thing, or even to see some theater. But it didn't quite totally satisfy us in putting money on the table to pay for food and rent and things like that. So I was able to land a job. I put my resume out, and I landed a job with Daniel J. Edelman Public Relations firm, which was kind of interesting because it was an international public relations firm. And all of a sudden I was in with some of the big hitters as far as handling their work, like the American Trial Lawyers Association. That was during the time of the no-fault insurance thing was a big issue, and flammable materials was another issue that we dealt with quite a bit. So, but that was also a very good experience for me. But it was very tense because everything was under pressure. And we had a guy that ran our office this Joe Dragonette that probably his name fit pretty good, Dragonette, like dragon, because it was run by fear. Like people were afraid every time the paycheck came around, they were going to get their pink slip. But fortunately, I was one of the lower rung executives there, and they were mainly eliminating the more higher priced people at work, so I was able to survive and did quite well there until I was hired to work at TransUnion Corporation, running their public relations there, and that was one of the most wonderful locations I've ever worked. We started working, our offices originally were downtown Chicago, so I would take the train in, and we were living in Northbrook at that time. In fact, at this current house where this interview is being done. And anyway, I'm kind of at a loss here I lost my train of thought, what I was trying to say, but oh yes, we had the location of the work was moved from downtown Chicago to Lincolnshire area off a half-day road. And so from Northbrook, where our house was, to drive over to my work, which was in this just beautiful setting. In fact, people came in there mistaking it for a country club or a arboretum. It was so beautiful, with bridges and water and flowers and all. And we had a gated entrance. And my office overlooked like an area of like a forest and we'd have deer coming up. So, like I said, it was very beautiful to work there, and it took only about 15 minutes to get to work. So all of the downtown commuting thing was over with, and that was quite a change in my life. And that, now, of course, I'm leaving out a lot of important stuff as far as Marianne and my movements. As far as you know, we lived in, like I said, in our first place in Harwood Heights, and then we lived. Our first real home, as such, was in Bellwood, Illinois, just before you get over the bridge in Elmhurst. And it's funny because there were all new homes, and we had no idea who our neighbors were going to be. And it turned out that we moved in an area where a lot of Sicilians moved into that same area, and mainly they had come from the Taylor Street area of Chicago to escape the problems that they were having down there. So once again, it kind of almost reminded me a little bit of high school, where I was the only Swede among a bunch of Polish people, and here we were the only ones of our nature among a bunch of Sicilians who like to play bocce ball in their yard, and had kind of gaudy displays of statues and things like that in their yards. But we got along well with them. They liked us, and which we were fortunate about, because in fact I remember I bowled on a local bowling team there, and some of the members were Sicilians, and they got to the point where they said, "Dick, is there anybody bothering you that you want us to take care of?" And I assured them, no, there was nobody that was causing me any problems, but they were willing to do something bad, I guess, if anybody was giving me a hard time, and I told them about it. And I remember we had one guy in the block in particular where we lived that worked in trucking, and on occasion he would say, "Hey Dick, your wife need a fur coat? I got this fur coat that fell off a truck. So he'd be trying to offer things to us, which I turned down, of course, realizing, the difficulty there. And it's kind of sad, but later on, I know one of these young Sicilian guys in our block was found dead right in his own car in his driveway under suspicious circumstances, but I don't think they ever did find out what really happened there. But anyway, that was one of our moves that we had made, and then from there, it turned out that during the time had been with Schwinn Bicycle Company, Mary and I had come up to Northbrook and to watch the bicycle races, and we noticed what a neat area this was up here. And we thought, geez, this would be a nice change to move from where we were in Bellwood, which was transitioning quite rapidly into a little less favorable type of people living around you. And they were also talking about putting in some small factory type buildings around us, which we didn't care for because we were hoping the thing would be all just regular community of houses. So we were able to sell our house there, and we bought a little house here in Northbrook. On Thornwood Lane was our first house. And it's hard to believe now when we drive back there and take a look at that house, how all of us fitted in it, because, there are five girls and my wife and myself. So, anyway, that was our first home here, and it was, we knew we fell in love with Northbrook, that this is where we wanted to live. And later on, we did try a move, which was a very short move up to the Libertyville area. But the area we moved into had a lot of young people who were doing vandalism type things. So that was a place we wanted to get out of very fast, and we did. And we ended up, we prayed, I remember specifically, we prayed, Lord, we want an answer at that one time within 24 hours, which is really putting the Lord on the spot. But the next day, after we prayed that, we got a telephone call from the local lady here, Lillian Kerstetter from Koenig and Stray, I remember that. She said there's a house available, and we were the first ones to look at it. So I brought Mary Ann over here, and before we even went in the house to look at the house, she knew in the spirit that this was what the Lord had for us. And that was one of the best decisions I think we ever made in our lives, is buying this property in Northbrook. It's hard to believe now the value of this property. I think the ground is probably worth more than the house, but Northbrook has grown so tremendously, and the value of the property has increased so much. It's just absolutely amazing what's happened there. Now, one aspect that I've completely left out, because it's hard to do these things chronologically, but obviously I left out all the birth of our children, which is a critical area, and I didn't mean to leave it out, but I want to mention that it was during the time we were living in Harwood Heights that Kim was, our firstborn, was born. And one story I remember about that was kind of interesting, because I got a call that Mary Ann was going to have the baby. So I was rushing home, and I was exceeding the speed limit. And I remember this policeman stopping me and saying, why was I going so fast? And I told him, because my wife is having a baby. And he said, oh yeah, sure. He's heard that story before. But apparently he finally went along and believed me to the point where he let me go and never gave me a ticket. But I found out that we had a police office in the building where our apartments were, and he had checked around to make sure that was there somebody that had a baby. So they assured him yes, that I wasn't telling a lie. It was kind of interesting on that. It's funny, I more remember things with her when we were at the Bellwood house. And how she was, with her blonde hair, of course she was a little different in that fashion. In fact, she still is, you know, from the other kids as far as her hair coloring and appearance. But that she would be wearing these cute little ballerina type outfits and always liked to pose for pictures and things. So that was good. Of course, Holly, our third one, came along, and mainly I remember she was up in Libertyville with us at the time when she was a baby, and that was a very difficult time for her because we were going through all the stress with not only the birth but living in a house we realized was a big mistake. So that was hard. But like I say, the Lord worked everything out. And then, of course, Joy came along, was our next born, and that we were living in Northbrook again. And then finally Dana, rounding out our total of 5 daughters, which people still find hard to believe that we have 5 daughters. But